a simple stick of wood and a core of carbon. It seems primitive in a digital age, but the pencil was the first portable tool for the human mind. From the hidden graphite mines of Borrowdale to the blueprints that built the modern world, this humble instrument democratizes literacy and sparked the scientific revolution. It is the bridge between a thought and a reality. The history of the global pencil empire is a blueprint for how a multi-billion-dollar industry can be built from the most humble of earthbound elements. It is a story of monopoly, military secrecy, and the ruthless pursuit of profit. To understand the foundation of fortune behind this tool, we must travel back to the year 1564, to a remote valley in northern England known as Borrowdale. Following a massive storm that uprooted an ancient ash tree, local shepherds discovered a strange, dark, greasy substance clinging to the roots. They had no word for it, but they soon realized it was something extraordinary. It was graphite, the only large-scale, high-purity deposit of solid-state graphite ever discovered on the planet. In the 16th century, the economic value of a resource was often dictated by its scarcity and its utility in warfare. Graphite possessed both. While other parts of the world had graphite in powder form, the Borrowdale deposit consisted of pure, solid lumps that could be cut directly into sticks. This geological fluke gave England a global monopoly that would last for over 200 years. Initially, the local shepherds used the material for the most mundane of tasks, marking their sheep for inventory. But as the material reached the markets of London, its true industrial potential became clear. The British Crown realized that ground graphite was the perfect lubricant for lining the molds of iron cannonballs. This allowed for a smoother finish during the casting process, which significantly increased the range and accuracy of naval artillery. The pencil, in its earliest form, was a secondary byproduct of a high-stakes arms race. Because of its military importance, the Borrowdale mine became one of the most guarded sites in the British Empire. The financial numbers were staggering. By the mid-1700s, a single ton of this grey gold was valued at approximately £3,920 sterling. To put that in perspective, the average annual wage for a skilled artisan at the time was less than £40. This meant a single ton of graphite was worth nearly a century's worth of labor. The logistics of protecting this wealth were extreme and militaristic. The mine was only open for a few weeks every few years to maintain an artificial scarcity that kept prices astronomically high. When the mining window closed, the owners would flood the shafts with water to prevent black market miners, known locally as wad stealers, from sneaking in. Armed guards with blunderbusses patrolled the sorting rooms, and miners were subjected to humiliating daily body searches. A piece of graphite the size of a human thumb was worth more than a month's wages for a common man. As the graphite moved from military applications into the hands of scholars, architects, and the growing European elite, the challenge shifted to usability. The raw mineral was messy, it stained the hands and was prone to snapping under pressure. In the late 1500s, Italian innovation transformed the mineral into a tool. Simonio and Lindiana Bernacotti, professional woodworkers, were the first to experiment with wooden casings. This was a critical moment in the foundations of fortune. They took a stick of juniper wood and hollowed out a square channel along its entire length. They would then snap off a rod of pure graphite, fit it into the groove, and glue a second piece of wood on top to create a sandwich. This wasn't just a design improvement, it was a revolution in logistics. A wooden casing allowed the graphite to be transported in crates across oceans without breaking. It turned a brittle mineral into a durable consumer product that could be branded and sold at a premium. By the 17th century, the Cumberland pencil had become a global status symbol. If you were a scientist like Isaac Newton or an artist like Rembrandt, you demanded the pure, unadulterated lead from the Borrowdale mines. These early pencils were not round, they were square, reflecting the shape of the hand-cut graphite rods inside. They were expensive, handcrafted tools, often sold for the equivalent of a full day's wages for a common worker. At this stage, the industry was still one of artisan wealth, small-scale production with high individual margins. But the seeds of a massive industrial fortune were being planted. The British monopoly was so absolute that it sparked a wave of industrial espionage. Chemists across Europe were desperate to find a way to replicate the British pencil without access to the British graphite. The final catalyst for the first great shift in this industry's fortune was the geopolitical chaos of the late 18th century. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British naval blockade effectively starved France of its supply of English pencils. Napoleon Bonaparte, realizing that his generals could not coordinate troop movements without writing tools for maps and orders, commissioned a brilliant scientist named Nicolas Jacques Conté to solve the crisis. In 1795, Conté achieved a breakthrough that would change the economics of writing forever. He realized he didn't need the rare, pure lumps from England. He took low-quality, powdered graphite, which was far cheaper and found in abundance across Europe, and mixed it with fine kaolin clay. By firing this mixture in a high-temperature kiln, he created a ceramic graphite hybrid. This was a financial goldmine for three reasons. First, the cost of raw materials plummeted. Powdered graphite was a fraction of the price of the solid Cumberland stone. Second, it allowed for the first true product line in history. By varying the ratio of clay to graphite, Conté could control the hardness of the lead. This gave birth to the grading system we still use today, allowing a single factory to sell different pencils to different professionals, thereby maximizing market share. Third, the yield was nearly 100%. Every gram of graphite powder could now be utilized, with zero waste. This Conté process moved the pencil from the world of the artisan into the world of industrial mass production. It set the stage for the massive 19th-century dynasties that would build castles and empires from a 3-cent stick of wood. The 19th century marked the transition of the pencil from a tool of the scholar to an instrument of the masses, and with this shift came the birth of the first true stationery dynasties. At the center of this transformation was the Faber-Castell family of Germany. By the mid-1800s, the foundation of fortune for the pencil had moved away from the raw mineral wealth of England and toward the mastery of industrial scale and brand identity. Lothar von Faber, who took over the family business in 1839, was a visionary of the industrial age. He realized that the key to massive, sustainable wealth was not just the product itself, but the standardization of that product. Before Faber, pencils were sold in various lengths, thicknesses, and shapes. This inconsistency made it impossible to build a global brand. Lothar von Faber was the man who decided that the pencil should be hexagonal. From a financial perspective, this was a masterpiece of efficiency. A hexagonal shape requires less wood than a square one during the cutting process, yet it provides a better grip than a round one. More importantly for the office environment of the time, hexagonal pencils did not roll off slanted drafting desks. This small engineering choice ensured that the Faber pencil stayed in the hand and on the desk of every architect and clerk in Europe. But Faber's greatest stroke of genius was the power of the penny. He recognized that the pencil was the perfect consumable. It was an object designed to vanish through use. Every time a child sharpened their pencil in school, or a banker made a ledger entry, they were grinding away a product that would eventually need to be replaced. By 1850, the Faber factory in Stein, Germany, was producing over 150 different varieties of pencils, but they all adhered to the same rigid manufacturing tolerances. This consistency allowed him to put his family name on every stick of wood in gold foil, the first time a manufacturer had branded a pencil. The wealth generated by this volume was staggering. By the late 1800s, the Faber-Castell factories were producing over 250 million pencils per year. Even with a profit of only a fraction of a cent per unit, the sheer scale of global consumption resulted in annual profits exceeding $600,000 in 1890, a sum equivalent to tens of millions of dollars in modern purchasing power. This wealth funded the construction of the Stein Castle, a sprawling palace near Nuremberg that served as a monument to stationery. Every stone of that castle was paid for by the humble 3-cent pencil. Lothar von Faber was eventually elevated to the nobility, becoming a baron, proving that in the 19th century, a foundation of fortune could be built on the most basic of human needs, the need to communicate. While the Fabers ruled Europe, a different kind of empire was rising across the Atlantic. In the United States, the focus shifted from the core to the shell. To maximize profit, The industry needed wood that was soft enough to be sharpened but strong enough to maintain its integrity under pressure. They found it in the southern red cedar forests of Florida and Tennessee. In the mid-19th century, these forests were so vast that red cedar was considered a nuisance wood, often sold for pennies an acre or used to build simple fence posts. Pencil magnates like Eberhard Faber, the American branch of the family, realized that by buying up this land, they could achieve vertical integration. They didn't just buy wood, they bought the forests, the sawmills, and the shipping lines. This allowed them to control the entire cost of the supply chain. The logistics of this wood trade were immense. Hundreds of thousands of cedar logs were floated down the Hudson River toward factories in New York and New Jersey. These logs were sliced into thin rectangular boards called slats, which were then treated with wax and dyes. The wax was a critical technical detail. It lubricated the wood fibers so that a sharpener's blade would glide through the cedar without splintering. By 1872, the Joseph Dixon Crucible Company in Jersey City was producing 30,000 pencils a day using high-speed, steam-powered machinery. This was industrial wealth in its purest form. Dixon understood that the American people wanted something patriotic and reliable. He named his flagship pencil the Ticonderoga, after a famous fort, and painted it a bright, distinctive yellow. This brings us to one of the most successful marketing psychological ploys in history. In the late 1890s, the highest quality graphite was being imported from China. To signal that their pencils contained this superior Chinese graphite, manufacturers like L&C Hartmar began painting their pencils yellow, the color of the Chinese imperial family. At a time when a standard, unpainted pencil cost a penny, these yellow pencils were sold for 5 cents. Consumers willingly paid a 500% markup for the status of the yellow lacquer, even though the cost of the paint was negligible. This marketing masterstroke was so successful that today, over 75% of all pencils sold in the United States are still painted yellow. It is a reminder that a foundation of fortune is often built not just on the quality of the material, but on the perception of luxury. As the 19th century drew to a close, the pencil had become the democratic engine of the Industrial Revolution. It was the tool used to sketch the blueprints of skyscrapers, the maps of new railroads, and the ledgers of international trade. The fortunes of the Fabers, the Dixons, and the Hartmuts were built on the idea that in a world of complex machinery and massive infrastructure, everyone still needed a small, reliable stick of wood and carbon. The pencil was the one luxury that a king and a coal miner could both afford, and in that universal demand lay the greatest wealth of the era. The middle of the 19th century saw a high-stakes race to control the rarest raw materials on the planet, a pursuit that pushed the boundaries of human endurance and logistics. While the English mines at Borrowdale were beginning to falter, the global demand for premium lead was at an all-time high. To maintain the foundations of fortune, the pencil dynasties needed a new source of pure graphite that could rival the Cumberland stone. This led to one of the most expensive and daring logistical feats in the history of the industry, the discovery and exploitation of the Siberian graphite mines. In 1847, a French merchant and adventurer named Jean-Pierre Alibert discovered a massive deposit of graphite in the Sayan Mountains of eastern Siberia, near the border of Mongolia. This wasn't just any graphite, it was almost 100% pure carbon, possessing a texture that was both dense and buttery, perfect for the highest tier of drafting and artistic pencils. Lothar von Faber, ever the strategist, recognized that owning this resource would give him an untouchable monopoly on the ultra-premium market. He signed an exclusive contract with Alibert, ensuring that every ounce of this black gold would be channeled directly into the Faber-Castell factories. However, the geography of the mine presented a financial challenge that would have bankrupted a lesser firm. The graphite was located at the summit of Mount Bachugol, a desolate and frozen peak. The logistics required to move this material were staggering in their cost and complexity. First, the graphite had to be extracted by hand in sub-zero temperatures. It was then packed into heavy crates and loaded onto reindeer sleds. These sleds were the only vehicles capable of navigating the treacherous, snow-choked mountain passes. Imagine the overhead of this operation. a massive caravan of reindeer and workers trekking across thousands of miles of frozen Siberian wilderness to reach the port of Taganrog on the Sea of Azov. From there, the graphite was loaded onto ships for a multi-month journey across the Mediterranean and up through the Atlantic to the factories in Germany. The cost of animal feed, labor, and maritime insurance for these treks was immense. Yet, from a business perspective, the logic was flawless. By controlling the highest quality raw material in existence, Faber could charge a staggering premium. These Siberian lead pencils were sold at 4 to 5 times the price of a standard pencil. This was a masterclass in high-margin economics. Faber wasn't just selling a tool, he was selling the story of the reindeer, the frozen mountains, and the purest carbon on Earth. This exclusivity cemented the Faber brand as the choice of kings and master artists, a reputation that translated into millions of dollars in brand equity. As the Siberian graphite was being integrated into the European market, the technical process of clay mixing was also being refined to a razor's edge. This was the invisible part of the fortune, the chemistry. Manufacturers realized that the purity of the clay was just as important as the purity of the graphite. They began importing kaolin clay from specialized mines in China and the Czech Republic. The clay had to be levigated, a process where it was mixed with water in a series of settling tanks. The heavy impurities would sink to the bottom, while the finest, most microscopic clay particles would remain suspended in the water. This slip was then collected and dried. When mixed with the Siberian graphite, it created a lead that was so smooth it felt like writing with silk. The technical precision of these mixtures allowed for the first true grading scales. Architects needed the 6H lead, a hard, ceramic-heavy core that wouldn't smudge. Artists needed the 8B, a soft, graphite-rich core that could produce deep, velvet blacks. By diversifying the product line through chemistry, the pencil barons were able to capture every sector of the market, from the primary schoolroom to the engineering firm. This period also saw the birth of the wholesale monopoly. To protect their profits, the Big Four, Faber, Dixon, Hartmouth, and Eagle, began to fix prices and control distribution channels. They understood that the pencil was a gateway product. If you could get a student to use your pencil in school, they would remain loyal to your brand when they became a professional architect or accountant. This led to massive marketing budgets. They produced elaborate catalogs and trade show displays that cost thousands of dollars, a fortune at the time. They were no longer just making pencils. They were managing a global supply chain that stretched from the reindeer paths of Siberia to the cedar forests of Florida. The wealth generated was no longer being measured in thousands, but in millions. The infrastructure required to maintain this fortune was also evolving. Factories became cities unto themselves. The Faber-Castell works in Stein grew to include housing for workers, schools, and even a library. This wasn't just benevolence. It was a way to ensure a stable, skilled workforce that would keep the secret recipes for the lead within the family. These secret formulas were the intellectual property of the 19th century. They were kept in iron safes and passed down from father to son. If a rival discovered the exact temperature of the kilns or the specific wax blend used to soak the cedar, the family's competitive advantage would vanish overnight. Thus, the foundation of fortune for the pencil was built on 3 pillars: the exclusive control of rare earth minerals, the mastery of high-heat chemistry, and the absolute secrecy of the industrial process. As we move into the next era of our story, we will see how this wealth was tested by the greatest conflict in human history, and how a 3-cent tool became an essential instrument of war. While the European dynasties focused on the rarity of Siberian graphite, the American foundation of fortune was built on the sheer mechanical genius of mass production. To understand the wealth of the American pencil kings, one must look at the transition from the handcrafted hollowed stick to the slat sandwich method. This was the process that allowed companies like Dixon and Eberhard Faber to produce millions of units with surgical precision. The process began with the incense cedar or southern red cedar logs, which were sliced into thin, uniform boards known as slats. These slats were exactly half the thickness of a finished pencil. To ensure maximum profit, every millimeter of the wood had to be utilized. The slats were fed into a high-speed planing machine that carved 6 to 9 parallel, semicircular grooves across the surface of the wood. These grooves were deep enough to hold exactly half of the graphite lead. The financial efficiency of this method was unmatched. In a single motion, a machine could prepare the housing for nearly a dozen pencils. Once the grooves were cut, a second machine, often a proprietary secret of the factory, would lay the graphite lead into the trenches. A second grooved slat, coated in a layer of high-strength animal hide glue, was then placed on top. This sandwich was then moved into a massive hydraulic press. The pressure was calculated to be high enough to fuse the two pieces of wood into a single solid block, but not so high that it crushed the delicate ceramic cores within. The sandwich would sit in a drying room for several days, a process that required massive warehouse space and climate control. This storage was a hidden cost of the industry, but it ensured that the wood would not warp or shrink, preserving the structural integrity of the brand. Once the glue had fully cured, the wooden block was fed into a shaping machine. This was a marvel of 19th-century engineering. A set of high-speed circular cutters would pass over the block, carving the top and bottom simultaneously. In a spray of cedar-scented sawdust, the block would emerge not as a slab, but as individual, perfectly shaped hexagonal pencils. This automation allowed for a level of consistency that no hand carver could ever hope to match. It also drastically reduced the labor cost per unit. While a European craftsman might spend 20 minutes hollowing a single stick by hand, an American factory could produce thousands of pencils in that same window of time. This was the foundation of fortune for the American middle class, the ability to take a luxury item and turn it into a commodity that could be sold for a single penny while still generating a healthy profit. The economics of the American factory were also driven by the management of waste. The massive amounts of cedar sawdust and shavings generated by the shaping machines were not discarded. Instead, they were collected and sold to other industries. Cedar oil was extracted from the waste for use in perfumes and medicines, and the remaining wood pulp was often burned to power the very steam engines that ran the factory. This circular economy ensured that every cent invested in a log was recovered. The wealth generated by this efficiency allowed the pencil barons to expand their influence into the political sphere. Joseph Dixon, for instance, became a titan of industry in Jersey City, using his pencil fortune to fund the development of early telegraph technology and steel manufacturing. He understood that the pencil was not an end in itself, but a liquid asset that could fund the next wave of the Industrial Revolution. As the factories grew, so did the complexity of the lead recipe. By the 1880s, the leading firms were no longer just mixing graphite and clay with water. They began experimenting with intrusive lubricants. After the lead were fired in the kiln, they were porous, like a sponge. To make the pencil glide more smoothly, the manufacturers would submerge the hot lead into vats of molten wax, tallow, or even spermaceti oil from whales. The lead would drink the fat, filling the microscopic gaps in the ceramic matrix. This technical detail is what separates a cheap, scratchy pencil from a professional tool. The cost of these additives was significant, but it allowed the firms to charge a premium for drawing quality pencils. A professional artist would pay 4 times the price for a pencil that didn't drag on the paper, and that margin was almost entirely pure profit for the manufacturer. The scale of these operations by the end of the 19th century was truly global. A single pencil made in New Jersey might contain graphite from Siberia, clay from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, wax from the South Seas, and cedar from the American South. The logistics of coordinating these raw materials required a sophisticated network of telegraphs, steamships, and banking credits. The pencil was no longer just a stick of wood, it was a physical manifestation of the global economy. The families who sat at the center of this network, the Fabers, the Dixons, the Eagle Pencil Company, were the industrial aristocracy. They lived in mansions that rivaled those of the railroad kings, proving that a fortune built on pennies is often more stable than one built on gold. As we look toward the 20th century, we will see how this stability was tested by the introduction of metal engineering and the first mechanical Eversharp pencils. As the pencil industry entered the latter half of the 19th century, the foundation of fortune expanded from the creation of the mark to the mastery of its removal. 4 centuries, the eraser had been a clumsy afterthought. Early writers used balled-up pieces of bread crust to lift graphite from paper, a method that was both inefficient and prone to attracting vermin in libraries and offices. The discovery of rubber, or India gum, changed the chemistry of the desk, but for decades, the eraser remained a separate, easily lost object. The man who saw the financial potential in merging these two tools was a Philadelphia inventor named Hyman Lipman. In 1858, Lipman realized that the consumable nature of the pencil made it the perfect vehicle for a second consumable, the rubber plug. He patented the idea of hollowing out the end of the wooden barrel and gluing a small piece of rubber inside, creating the first self-contained writing and editing tool. From a business perspective, Lipman's invention was a masterstroke of convenience. He didn't just invent a product, he invented a workflow. By making the eraser inseparable from the pencil, he increased the value of the object while simultaneously ensuring that the eraser would be used up at the same rate as the graphite. In 1862, at the height of the American Civil War, Lipman sold his patent to Joseph Reckendorfer for the staggering sum of $100,000. To a common worker in the mid-19th century, who might earn $300 a year, this sum was equivalent to 3 centuries of labor. In modern purchasing power, this was a $3.5 million transaction for a simple idea. It proved that in the foundations of fortune, the most valuable asset wasn't always the factory or the forest, but the intellectual property that controlled how people worked. However, this massive payout sparked one of the most significant legal battles in industrial history. The pencil titans, led by the Faber family, refused to pay royalties for what they considered a common-sense addition. They argued that putting an eraser on a pencil was a mere aggregation of parts and not a true invention. The case, Reckendorfer versus Faber, eventually reached the United States Supreme Court in 1875. The court's ruling would have a profound impact on the industry's profitability. They declared the patent invalid, stating that a double function did not equal a patentable invention. This was a paradoxical victory for the foundation of fortune. While it stripped Reckendorfer of his monopoly, it allowed every pencil manufacturer in the world to add erasers for free. This led to the birth of the ferrule, the small metal ring that holds the eraser in place. The ferrule added a new layer of industrial complexity, requiring massive quantities of brass and aluminum, and further separating the premium pencil from the cheap alternative. As the wooden pencil reached its peak of industrial efficiency, a new foundation of fortune was emerging in the world of high-precision metal engineering, the mechanical pencil. The transition from wood to metal changed the economic model from a consumable commodity to a durable luxury. The first patent for a refillable mechanical pencil was granted in Britain in 1822 to Samson Mordan and John Isaac Hawkins. These early propelling pencils were not made of cedar, but of sterling silver and gold. They were sold as jewelry for the desk, and their profit margins were astronomical compared to the wooden stick. Mordan's company, S. Mordan and Company, targeted the rising Victorian middle class, the bankers, lawyers, and merchants who wanted a writing tool that signaled their success. The fortune here was built on the prestige of the metal casing and the technical complexity of the internal screw mechanism. The mechanical pencil changed the logistics of the graphite trade. Because the internal mechanisms required a perfectly uniform lead, the lead recipe had to become even more precise. Manufacturers had to extrude lead that were accurate to within 1/1000th of an inch. This required the use of diamond dies and advanced hydraulic machinery. It also allowed for a new revenue stream, the lead refill. By selling the metal pencil once, and the graphite refills forever, the industry discovered the razor and blade business model nearly a century before it became a staple of modern commerce. This was a more sophisticated form of the power of the penny. The initial purchase was expensive, but the ongoing cost of the lead ensured that the consumer was tethered to the brand for a lifetime. This model turned stationery into a high-end luxury market, leading to the creation of brands like Cross and Parker. By the end of the 19th century, the foundation of fortune for the pencil was a multi-layered empire. At the bottom was the mass-produced wooden pencil, sold by the billions to schools and governments. In the middle were the professional drafting pencils, driven by chemical precision and Siberian graphite. At the top were the silver and gold mechanical pencils, sold as status symbols to the elite. The industry had successfully captured every level of human society. The wealth generated by these various tiers allowed the pencil barons to survive the massive economic shifts of the coming century. They had built a business that was recession-proof, because no matter how the economy fluctuated, people still needed to record their thoughts, their debts, and their dreams. The pencil was the silent partner of the Industrial Revolution, and the families who owned its secrets were among the most stable and enduring dynasties of the Gilded Age. As we move into our next segment, we will explore the golden age of the yellow pencil, and how a simple coat of paint became the most powerful marketing tool in the history of global trade. We will look at the specific psychological tactics used to convince the public that a yellow pencil was worth 5 times more than a natural wood one, and how this imperial branding strategy solidified the fortunes of the Hartmut and Ticonderoga empires for over a century. The pencil was no longer just a tool of utility, it had become a masterpiece of psychological warfare in the marketplace. By the late 1880s, the foundation of fortune for the pencil industry shifted from the factory floor to the subconscious of the consumer. The global market was saturated with functional, reliable, but visually indistinguishable wooden pencils. To break out of this commodity trap, manufacturers needed a way to signal superior quality without significantly increasing production costs. This led to what is arguably the most successful marketing psychological ploy in the history of global trade, the Imperial Yellow Revolution. The catalyst for this change was the discovery of high-grade graphite in Asia. At the time, the finest graphite in the world was being imported from China. Because China was a land of mystery and perceived luxury to Western consumers, the pencil barons sought a way to visually link their product to Chinese excellence. In 1890, the Austro-Hungarian firm L&C Hartmut, now known as Koh-i-Noor, introduced a new pencil at the World's Fair in Chicago. They named it the Koh-i-Noor, after the legendary diamond in the British crown jewels, signaling that this was the diamond of pencils. But the most striking feature was its color. While almost all other pencils were sold in their natural wood state or painted in dark, somber colors like maroon or black to hide imperfections in the cedar, Hartmut's painted the Koh-i-Noor a brilliant, gleaming yellow. This choice was deeply symbolic. Yellow was the color of the Chinese imperial family, representing royalty, power, and the highest possible social status. By painting a pencil yellow, Hartmut was making a bold, silent claim. This pencil contains the finest Chinese graphite, and it is fit for an emperor. The financial impact of this branding was immediate and staggering. At a time when a standard American pencil sold for a single penny, the yellow Koh-i-Noor was priced at 5 cents. This 500% markup was almost entirely pure profit. The cost of the yellow lacquer was negligible, fractions of a cent per unit, yet the perceived value was so high that professionals, artists, and wealthy businessmen flocked to the brand. Hartmut had successfully moved the pencil from a utility item to a Veblen good, a product where demand increases as the price increases because it serves as a status symbol. This strategy effectively cracked the code of the retail market. It proved that in the foundations of fortune, the story you tell about a product is often more valuable than the material used to build it. The success of the Koh-i-Noor was so total that it sent shockwaves through the American industry. Within years, rival firms like Dixon, Faber, and Eagle realized they could not compete with the yellow mystique using natural wood. They began painting their own flagship lines yellow, often using names that suggested Eastern origins or high-carat gold. This created a race to the top of the pricing ladder. By the turn of the century, yellow had become the industry shorthand for premium. This branding was so effective that it fundamentally rewired the brain of the global consumer. Even today, over a century later, if you ask a person to draw a pencil, they will almost instinctively reach for a yellow crayon. It is a rare example of a marketing campaign that became so successful it turned into a permanent cultural archetype. But the yellow markup wasn't just about the paint, it was about the grade. To justify the 5-cent price tag, manufacturers had to prove that the lead recipe was indeed superior. This led to the expansion of the hardness scale into a massive professional catalog. A top-tier firm would now offer up to 17 different grades of lead, from the ultra-hard 9H used by lithographers to the buttery, coal-black 9B used by portrait artists. From a logistical standpoint, this allowed the pencil barons to segment the market. They could sell a basic number 2 pencil to the school board by the millions at a low margin, while simultaneously selling specialized sets to architects and engineers at a high margin. This tiered pricing ensured that no matter who the customer was, the pencil empire had a product designed to extract the maximum amount of consumer surplus from their wallet. The wealth generated by these imperial brands allowed the industry to survive the transition into the 20th century. The Hartmut family, for instance, became one of the wealthiest in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, building factories that employed thousands and exporting to over 100 countries. In America, the Dixon Ticonderoga became the unofficial pencil of the United States government, a partnership that provided a stable, multi-million-dollar revenue stream for decades. They understood that the yellow pencil was more than a tool, it was a standard bearer. By fixing the color in the public's mind, they made it difficult for new, smaller competitors to enter the market. A consumer would look at a natural wood pencil and perceive it as cheap or unfinished, even if the graphite inside was identical to the yellow one. This branding barrier is a classic foundation of fortune, creating a moat around the industry leaders that lasted for generations. As we move into the 20th century, this branding would be tested by the harsh realities of global conflict. The imperial yellow would soon be replaced by the olive drab of the military, and the pencil kings would have to pivot from selling status to selling survival. We will see how the supply chains of Siberia and the American South were disrupted by 2 world wars, and how the pencil became a critical instrument of espionage and military logistics. The fortune built on the power of the penny and the imperial yellow would be forced to adapt to a world of blockades, spies, and total war. But through it all, the pencil remained indispensable, proving that once a foundation is laid in the mind of the consumer, it can withstand even the greatest shocks of history. As the world plunged into the total mobilization of the 20th century, the foundations of fortune were repurposed for the machinery of war. The pencil, once a symbol of imperial luxury and bureaucratic order, became a high-stakes strategic asset. To understand its value during the world wars, one must look past the stationery store and into the war rooms and prisoner of war camps. In 1814 and 1939, the pencil was classified as an essential industry. Without it, the modern military machine would have ground to a halt. Officers required pencils for marking topographical maps, engineers needed them for the rapid design of ballistics and bridge work, and every soldier required a means to write letters home, the only thread of morale connecting the front lines to the civilian world. During the Second World War, the British intelligence agency, MI9, recognized that the humble pencil was the perfect Trojan horse. Because a pencil was so ubiquitous and seemingly worthless, it rarely drew the suspicion of enemy guards. This led to a partnership between the British government and the Charles Cumberland Pencil Company to create escape pencils. These were masterpieces of covert engineering. To the naked eye, they appeared to be standard-issue green or black pencils. However, the cedar barrels were hollowed out using specialized machinery to create a secret cavity. Inside, instead of a full lead, the company hid tiny, folded silk maps of Germany, Italy, and occupied France. These maps were printed on silk because it was durable, silent when unfolded, and could survive being submerged in water. The technical difficulty of producing these tools was immense. The manufacturer had to ensure that the pencil could still be sharpened and used for writing, at least for the first inch, to maintain the illusion. Under the eraser ferrule, a miniature magnetized compass was often hidden. These pencils were distributed to Allied pilots and paratroopers. If they were shot down behind enemy lines, this 3-cent tool became a multi-$1,000 survival kit. The Charles Cumberland Pencil Company operated under the Official Secrets Act, with workers sworn to a silence that lasted for decades after the war. The fortune here was not measured in retail sales, but in government contracts and the immense political leverage gained by the pencil barons who proved their loyalty to the state. The economics of the pencil also shifted within the barbed wire of prisoner of war camps. In these environments, where traditional currency was non-existent, the pencil became a hard commodity. Because they were essential for the Red Cross letters that were the only legal form of communication, a single, high-quality pencil could be traded for several days' worth of chocolate, cigarettes, or bread. Graphite became a form of gray gold. In camps like Stalag Luft 3, pencils were guarded as fiercely as tools of escape, as they were required for forging identity papers and travel permits. A well-sharpened pencil was a forgery tool of the highest order, capable of replicating the intricate Gothic scripts of German bureaucratic stamps. Simultaneously, the global supply chains that fed the foundations of fortune were being severed by blockades. The American pencil industry found itself cut off from the high-quality German clays and Asian graphites that had defined the Imperial Yellow era. This forced a pivot to domestic innovation. The United States government funneled millions of dollars into the development of synthetic graphite and the exploitation of lower-grade mines in Mexico and Canada. This wartime research led to breakthroughs in polymer technology that would eventually lead to the modern plasticized lead. The industry proved that its foundation was not just in the raw materials, but in its ability to adapt its chemistry to the needs of the state. The end of the war did not diminish the pencil's importance. Instead, it ushered in the Reconstruction boom. The millions of blueprints required to rebuild the bombed cities of Europe and Japan were all drawn by hand, using the professional-grade pencils of the very companies that had survived the conflict. The Faber and Dixon dynasties emerged from the smoke of the mid-20th century stronger than ever. They had successfully transitioned from Gilded Age aristocrats to essential military contractors. The pencil had proven to be one of the few technologies that remained relevant in an age of radar, rockets, and atomic power. As we move into the post-war era, we will see how this fortune was further solidified by the baby boom and the massive expansion of the global education system. The post-war era of the mid-20th century brought about a foundation of fortune that was perhaps more stable than any military contract: the institutionalization of the pencil within the global education system. As the baby boom generation entered schools in record numbers across North America and Europe, the demand for writing instruments reached an unprecedented scale. However, the true wealth in this era was not found merely in the volume of sales, but in the creation of a mandatory standard. This was the era of the number 2 pencil. To understand this financial phenomenon, one must look at the intersection of psychology, bureaucracy, and the rise of early computing. Before this period, students and professionals used a wide variety of lead, but the introduction of standardized testing required a lead that was just right, dark enough for a machine to read, but hard enough not to smudge during handling. The economic engine behind the number 2 was the development of optical mark recognition, popularly known as the scantron. In the 1930s and 40s, early scoring machines relied on the electrical conductivity of graphite. For a machine to register an answer, the mark on the paper had to contain enough graphite to complete an electrical circuit. The number 2 lead, with its specific ratio of graphite to clay, provided the perfect balance of conductivity and physical strength. This technical requirement transformed a preference into a mandate. If you were a student in the 20th century, you did not just buy a pencil, you bought a number 2. This allowed manufacturers like Dixon Ticonderoga to narrow their focus, optimizing their assembly lines for a single, massive product run. In the world of manufacturing, simplicity is the ultimate driver of profit margins, and the number 2 became the most profitable simple object in the world. The logistics of the back-to-school season became the high-water mark of the fiscal year for the pencil dynasties. During the 1950s and 60s, the scale of production was mind-boggling. Factories in Tennessee and New Jersey were operating 24 hours a day, churning out billions of yellow pencils to meet the August deadline. The fortune here was built on predictability. Unlike fashion or high technology, the school pencil did not change. The machines did not need to be retooled, and the marketing did not need to be reinvented. This allowed the pencil barons to accumulate massive reserves of capital, which they used to diversify into other office supplies, such as pens, markers, and specialized art supplies. The pencil had become the cash cow of the stationery industry, providing the steady flow of revenue that funded the expansion of global conglomerates. However, the foundations of fortune also faced a new challenge during this era, the rise of the ballpoint pen. In the late 1940s, the introduction of the Reynolds rocket and later the Bic crystal threatened to make the pencil obsolete. The pen offered permanent ink and did not require sharpening, two features that appealed to the modern, fast-paced corporate world. The pencil kings had to fight for their market share by doubling down on the tactile advantage. They marketed the pencil as the tool of thought and revision. While the pen was for the final draft, the pencil was for the creative process, the sketching, the brainstorming, and the mathematical problem-solving where mistakes were expected. By positioning the pencil as the tool of the in-progress mind, they carved out a psychological niche that the ballpoint pen could not touch. The economics of the industry also saw a shift toward the professional-grade market. As the average school pencil became a low-margin commodity, the real wealth shifted toward the elite tools used by engineers and animators. This was the golden age of the Walt Disney and Warner Brothers studios, where thousands of artists used millions of high-grade drawing pencils to bring characters to life. A single animator might go through a dozen pencils in a day, seeking a specific feel or drag on the animation paper. Companies like Eberhard Faber responded by creating the Blackwing 602, a pencil with a unique rectangular eraser and a lead so smooth its slogan was half the pressure, twice the speed. These pencils were sold at a massive premium to the creative class, proving once again that in a commodity market, the highest profits are found in the pursuit of perfection. The foundation of fortune in the mid-20th century was ultimately about integration. The pencil was integrated into the legal requirements of the education system, the technical requirements of the emerging computer age, and the creative requirements of the entertainment industry. The wealth generated was no longer just about the wood and the lead, it was about the system that required their use. The pencil barons had successfully built a world where their product was an invisible but essential infrastructure. As we move forward, we will see how this infrastructure survived the digital revolution and why, in an age of silicon and glass, the 3-cent wooden stick remains a multi-billion-dollar global powerhouse. We will explore the return to the analog and the enduring legacy of the titans who built their castles on a foundation of graphite and cedar. As the 20th century moved into its final decades, the foundations of fortune for the pencil industry underwent a radical, invisible transformation. The era of the simple clay and graphite mixture was challenged by the rise of polymer science. To understand the modern wealth of the stationery empires, one must look at the polymer lead. While the traditional kiln-fired ceramic lead had served the world for nearly 2 centuries, it had physical limitations. It was inherently brittle and could only be made so thin before it would snap under the weight of a writer's hand. The solution came from the high-tech laboratories of Japan and Germany, where chemists began replacing natural clay binders with synthetic polymers and plastics. This was not just a technical upgrade, it was a total recalibration of the industry's profit margins. By using synthetic resins, manufacturers could extrude lead that were incredibly thin, down to 0.2 millimeters, while maintaining a tensile strength that seemed to defy physics. This polymer revolution allowed for the mass-market explosion of the modern mechanical pencil. From a financial perspective, this changed the business model from one of wood and waste to one of precision plastic. The manufacturing of polymer lead is a highly automated, high-temperature process that requires massive capital investment in chemical engineering. This served as a new moat for the established titans. Small, local competitors could easily buy cedar and clay, but they could not replicate the complex molecular chains required for high-grade polymer lead. This effectively centralized the global refill market into the hands of a few elite firms like Pentel, Pilot, and Uniball. In the foundations of fortune, the goal is always to create a product that is difficult to replicate but easy to consume. The polymer lead refill, sold in small plastic tubes, became a high-margin subscription service for the digital age office worker. The economics of this era were also shaped by the automation of the assembly. In the late 20th century, the labor cost of making a pencil was virtually eliminated in the West. Modern factories became cathedrals of robotics. A single production line could now produce millions of pencils a week with only a handful of human supervisors. The machines handle everything: the high-speed grooving of the slats, the laser-guided placement of the lead, the electrostatic painting of the barrels, and the ultrasonic welding of the ferrules. This extreme efficiency allowed the price of a standard pencil to remain almost stagnant for 30 years, even as the cost of living soared. By keeping the price low, the pencil barons ensured that the pencil remained a frictionless purchase, an item so cheap that the consumer never thinks twice about buying a dozen. This volume-based wealth is the bedrock of the modern stationery conglomerate. However, the foundation of fortune also had to survive the greatest threat in its history: the personal computer. In the 1980s and 90s, many analysts predicted the paperless office would lead to the pencil-less world. But the industry leaders pivoted with remarkable agility. They realized that while the computer took away the utility of writing, it could not take away the creativity. This led to a massive shift in marketing toward the adult coloring and professional fine art sectors. They began emphasizing the sensory experience of the pencil, the smell of the cedar, the resistance of the lead against the paper, and the permanence of the physical mark. This was the premiumization of the commodity. They weren't selling a tool for data entry, they were selling a tool for mindfulness and unplugging. This pivot was financially brilliant. A set of 72 professional-grade colored pencils can retail for over $200, despite the raw material cost being only a few dollars. The fortune here is built on the mastery of pigment chemistry. To create a light, fast, vibrant colored pencil, manufacturers must source rare minerals and synthetic dyes from across the globe. They use binders made of expensive waxes and oils that allow the color to lay down like paint. This turned the pencil from a schoolboy's tool into a high-end luxury good. The families who owned the foundations of fortune realized that as the world became more digital, the analog would become a luxury. They positioned the pencil as the antidote to the screen, a strategy that has led to record-breaking profits in the 21st century. The logistics of the modern empire are now more complex than ever. A single company like Faber-Castell now manages over 2,000 square kilometers of its own forests in Brazil, an area larger than many small countries. These forests are managed with eco-certification, which has become a modern foundation of fortune. In a world of conscious consumers, the sustainability of the wood is a marketable asset. They use fast-growing pine and cedar hybrids that are genetically selected for their straight grain and softness. By owning the biological source of their wood, they have insulated themselves from the fluctuating prices of the global timber market. They have successfully moved from the exploitation of the 19th century to the regeneration of the 21st, ensuring that the foundation of fortune will remain solid for another 400 years. As we look toward the next phase, we will explore the Blackwing cult and the return of the status pencil. We will see how a pencil that was once discontinued became the most sought-after tool in Silicon Valley and Hollywood, selling for $10 a piece on the secondary market. We will analyze the psychology of scarcity and how the pencil barons have learned to manipulate drops and limited editions to maintain their wealth in a world of infinite digital copies. The pencil is no longer just a tool, it is a cultural icon, a piece of quiet luxury that proves that the simplest foundations are often the most enduring. In the final decade of the 20th century, the foundations of fortune for the pencil industry took an unexpected turn toward the secondary market and the psychology of the status symbol. For most of its history, the pencil was a commodity, an object of utility that was essentially replaceable. However, the rise and fall of a single product line, the Eberhard Faber Blackwing 602, fundamentally changed how the industry viewed brand loyalty and perceived value. The Blackwing was not an ordinary pencil, it was a specialized tool with a unique rectangular ferrule and a replaceable eraser. Its lead was a secret mixture of graphite and wax that provided a smoothness unmatched by the standard number 2. By the 1990s, the machinery required to make the unique metal ferrule began to fail, and Eberhard Faber, then under the ownership of larger conglomerates, decided the product was no longer profitable enough to maintain. In 1998, the Blackwing was discontinued. This decision triggered one of the most fascinating economic phenomena in the history of stationery, the birth of the status pencil. As the remaining stock vanished from store shelves, a secondary market exploded on platforms like eBay. Professionals who relied on the pencil, Pulitzer Prize-winning authors, Hollywood animators, and Grammy-winning composers, began hoarding the remaining boxes. The price of a single Blackwing pencil, which originally retailed for less than 50 cents, skyrocketed to over $40 on the resale market. This was a masterclass in the economics of scarcity. It proved that a pencil could transcend its material value and become a Veblen good, an item where the high price actually increases its desirability. The fortune here was no longer in the volume of sales, but in the intense emotional and professional connection the consumer had with the brand. In 2010, the Palomino division of California Cedar Products Company recognized the untapped value of this legacy. They acquired the rights to the Blackwing name and set out to recreate the legend. But they didn't just relaunch a pencil, they launched a lifestyle brand. This is where the modern foundation of Fortune shifted toward experience marketing. They utilized high-quality incense cedar from their own Californian forests and combined it with premium Japanese graphite. They marketed the pencil not to the masses, but to the creative class. By positioning the Blackwing as a tool for mindful work in an age of digital distraction, they were able to justify a retail price of nearly $3 per pencil. This represented a massive increase in profit margins compared to the standard school pencil, which still sold for pennies. The financial brilliance of the new Blackwing model lay in the volume and drop strategy. Following the playbook of high-end fashion and streetwear brands, they introduced limited editions known as the Volumes series. Every quarter, a new pencil was released with a unique color, a specific hardness of lead, and a story connecting it to a historical event or a famous artist. For example, Volume 73 celebrated the history of the lake in Tahoe, while Volume 1 honored the legacy of Guy Clark. These drops created a sense of urgency and collectability. Suddenly, people weren't just buying a tool to write with, they were buying a piece of a story. They began subscribing to pencil releases, providing the company with a predictable, high-margin revenue stream that was entirely immune to the price wars of the big-box retailers. This shift into the status economy also had a ripple effect on the rest of the industry. Legacy giants like Faber-Castell and Staedtler responded by diving deeper into their own histories. They began releasing heritage collections and luxury lines. Faber-Castell's Graf von Faber-Castell line introduced pencils encased in rare woods like Pernambuco and Macassar ebony, with caps plated in silver and platinum. Some of these pencils retailed for over $200. This was the ultimate realization of the foundation of Fortune, the ability to take the world's most basic tool and elevate it to the level of a Swiss watch. The wealth generated here was not about the quantity of wood used, but about the precision engineering and artisanal heritage that the consumer was willing to pay for. The logistics of the status pencil also required a more sophisticated boutique supply chain. Unlike the mass-market pencils made by the billions, these high-end tools were produced in smaller, more controlled batches. This allowed for better quality control and a higher level of finish. The Fortune was protected by a high barrier to entry. To compete in this space, a newcomer would need not only the manufacturing capability but also the cultural capital, the trust of the artistic community and a history that felt authentic. This proved that in the digital age, brand authenticity was the most valuable raw material of all. The pencil barons had successfully turned their centuries-old history into a modern marketing moat, ensuring that even as the world moved toward touchscreens and voice-to-text, there would always be a demand for the perfect analog object. As the industry moved deeper into the 21st century, it became clear that the pencil was not going anywhere. It had survived the ballpoint pen, the typewriter, and the personal computer. The wealth of the industry was now rooted in a dual economy: the high-volume, low-margin utility pencils for the developing world and the global education market, and the high-margin, low-volume luxury pencils for the global creative elite. This diversification made the pencil empires incredibly resilient to economic shifts. They had a foot in both the necessity and luxury camps, a strategic position that very few industries can claim. The foundation of fortune was no longer just about graphite and wood. It was about the enduring human desire for a tool that is simple, reliable, and deeply personal. While the status pencil captured the wealth of the Western creative class, a far larger and more aggressive foundation of fortune was being built in the emerging economies of the global South. To understand the true global scale of the pencil empire in the 21st century, one must look at countries like India, Brazil, and Indonesia. In these regions, the pencil is not a mindful luxury. It is the essential, low-cost engine of mass literacy and economic mobility. As hundreds of millions of people transition from agrarian lifestyles into a formalized education system, the demand for writing instruments exploded. However, the profit model in these markets is radically different from that of the European castles. Here, the fortune is built on micromargins, the ability to make a profit on a product that sells for a fraction of a cent. In India, companies like Hindustan Pencils, the makers of the iconic Nataraj and Apsara brands, have mastered this high-volume strategy. They produce over 8 million pencils every single day. The foundation of fortune in this context is built on frugal engineering. Every aspect of the production process is optimized to strip out unnecessary costs. The wood used is often quick-growing veltum or aspen, sourced from local plantations to minimize transport costs. The lead are processed using local graphite deposits mixed with precisely calculated ratios of imported clay to maintain a standard quality that consumers can trust. By operating at such a massive scale, these firms can achieve economies of scale that allow them to dominate not only their home markets but also the export markets of Africa and the Middle East. The financial genius of the Global South model lies in distribution depth. In a country where the modern retail infrastructure of supermarkets and malls is still developing, the pencil must be available in the smallest kirana or corner shops in the most remote villages. This requires a logistics network that is incredibly resilient and decentralized. The fortune is protected by the sheer ubiquity of the brand. When a product is so cheap and so widely available, the cost of switching for a consumer becomes a psychological barrier. A parent in a rural village trusts the brand they used as a child, creating a multi-generational revenue stream that is difficult for foreign luxury brands to penetrate. This is the mass-market moat, a foundation built on trust and accessibility rather than exclusivity. Brazil represents another unique pillar of the modern pencil economy. It is the world's largest producer of sustainable pencil wood. Faber-Castell's massive operations in Brazil are a masterclass in biological asset management. In the state of Minas Gerais, the company manages over 10,000 hectares of pine forests. These are not wild forests, they are engineered ecosystems designed specifically for the pencil. The trees are planted in high-density cycles, with specific sections harvested every year to ensure a continuous, never-ending supply of wood slats. This living factory allows the company to bypass the volatility of the global timber market. When the price of wood spikes elsewhere in the world, the pencil kings are insulated because they own the rain, the soil, and the sunlight that produces their raw materials. This vertical integration in Brazil also allows for a zero-waste financial model. The pine used for pencils is a softer wood than the traditional cedar, which requires different chemical treatments to prevent warping. The company developed its own proprietary softening agents and waxes to turn utility wood into premium slats. The bark and leaves are turned into mulch for the next generation of trees, and the sawdust is compressed into briquettes for fuel. In the foundations of fortune, wealth is often found in the margins of what others throw away. By capturing every byproduct of the forest, the Brazilian operations have become the most profitable and sustainable segment of the global stationery trade. However, the Global South market is not just about cheap pencils, it is about brand aspiration. As the middle class in these countries grows, they begin to move up the value chain. A student who started with a basic Nataraj pencil may eventually graduate to a high-end Staedtler or a Rotring mechanical pencil. The pencil barons have learned to manage this aspirational ladder. They offer premium light products, pencils with better erasers or more attractive finishes, that are priced slightly higher but still within reach of the emerging middle class. This strategy allows the firms to increase their average revenue per user without losing their mass market base. It is a sophisticated game of economic chess played across thousands of retail points in dozens of different currencies. The foundation of fortune in the developing world is ultimately a bet on the future of human capital. Every pencil sold in a village in Kenya or a town in Vietnam is a tool being used to build a new workforce. The pencil companies are, in effect, silent partners in the growth of the global GDP. They understand that as long as there are people learning to read, write, and calculate, there will be a bottomless demand for their product. The wealth generated is a slow-motion fortune. It doesn't have the explosive growth of a tech startup, but it has a geological stability. It is a business built on the most reliable trend in human history, the desire for education and the tools to achieve it. While the mass market focused on schoolrooms and offices, a hidden foundation of fortune was forged in the world of high-precision technical drawing. To understand this specialized wealth, one must look at the era before computer-aided design, when every bridge, skyscraper, and engine was a hand-drawn masterpiece of geometry. The drafting pencil was the essential instrument of this industrial expansion. For a professional architect or mechanical engineer, a pencil was not just a writing tool, it was a measurement device. This requirement created a unique market segment where the price was almost irrelevant compared to the technical specifications. This was the high-precision economy, and the manufacturers who mastered it, companies like Staedtler, Rotring, and Caron Dash, built their fortunes on the razor-thin margins of accuracy. The financial engine of the technical market was the lead grading system taken to its absolute extreme. In this world, the difference between a 4H and a 5H lead was not just a matter of preference, it was a matter of physical property. A lead that was too soft would smudge, ruining a blueprint that had taken weeks to produce. A lead that was too hard would scratch the expensive vellum or tracing paper. The fortune was built on the chemical mastery required to ensure that a 4H lead produced in 1920 would feel exactly the same as one produced in 1980. This consistency allowed these firms to charge 10 times the price of a standard pencil. They were selling reliability insurance to the people responsible for the world's infrastructure. This period also saw the birth of the drafting lead holder, a hybrid between the wooden pencil and the mechanical pencil. Known as the clutch pencil, this tool used thick, 2mm lead that the user would sharpen manually with a specialized pointer. From a business perspective, the clutch pencil was a masterpiece of consumable lock-in. Once an engineering firm invested in hundreds of high-quality Rotring or Staedtler holders, they were tethered to that brand's specific lead refills. The profit was not in the metal holder, which might last a career, but in the constant, high-margin sale of the specialized lead sticks. This was the professional subscription model of the pre-digital age, creating a predictable and incredibly stable revenue stream that survived for over a century. The logistics of this specialized trade required a different kind of marketing. Instead of focusing on imperial yellow or baby boom volume, these companies focused on endorsement by expertise. They partnered with technical universities and engineering guilds. By ensuring that every student architect was trained using a specific brand of technical pencil, the manufacturers guaranteed that those students would specify that same brand for their entire professional lives. This is the institutional foundation of fortune, a strategy of capturing the user at the point of education and holding them through professional habit. It created a closed-loop market that was almost impossible for new competitors to enter, as they lacked the pedigree and the trust of the established guilds. The blueprint era also generated wealth through the ancillary market. Every technical pencil required a host of secondary tools, specialized sharpeners that could create a needle-thin chisel point, electric erasers for precise corrections, and pounce powder to keep the drawings clean. The pencil barons expanded their foundations of fortune by becoming system providers. They didn't just sell the stick of wood and graphite, they sold the entire ecosystem of the drafting table. This diversification made them indispensable to the military-industrial complex during the Cold War. As the United States and the Soviet Union raced to build rockets and submarines, the drafting pencil was the silent, high-precision tool behind every calculation. The contracts for these military-grade stationery supplies were worth millions, and they were awarded only to the few firms that could guarantee microscopic tolerances in their lead production. However, the late 20th century brought a seismic shift with the introduction of CAD, computer-aided design. As the drafting table was replaced by the computer monitor, the technical pencil market faced a crisis. But the foundation of fortune proved its resilience through tactile pivot. The companies realized that while the utility of drafting had moved to the screen, the ideation remained on paper. They began marketing their technical pencils to a new class of visual thinkers, graphic designers, concept artists, and luxury enthusiasts. They leaned into the weight and feel of the metal tools, turning them into mechanical jewelry. A Rotring 600 mechanical pencil, with its solid brass body and knurled grip, became a cult object, prized by designers for its analog soul in a digital world. The wealth of this sector is now driven by heritage engineering. Collectors and professionals will pay significant premiums for a tool that feels over-engineered. This is the foundation of quality, the idea that in an age of disposable plastic, a heavy, precisely balanced metal pencil is a statement of intent. The firms that survived the transition to the digital age are those that recognize that a pencil is not just a way to put a mark on paper, it is a way to bridge the gap between a thought and a reality. By owning that bridge, they have ensured that their foundations of fortune remain as solid as the skyscrapers their tools once helped to design. The drafting pencil remains the gold standard of the industry, a reminder that precision is the most valuable commodity of all. As we navigate the deep complexities of the digital era, the pencil industry have found an unlikely sanctuary within the human brain itself. To truly understand why the pencil remains a multi-billion-dollar global powerhouse, we must move beyond the chemistry of graphite and the logistics of cedar forests, and look instead at the cognitive monopoly of the analog mark. There is a profound psychological reason why, despite having tablets, styluses, and voice-to-text technology at our fingertips, the world still consumes over 14 billion pencils every year. The fortune of the pencil barons is now protected by the biological link between the hand, the eye, and the creative mind. This is the psychology of the pencil, a realization that the physical resistance of graphite against paper triggers a specific type of neural activity that digital screens have yet to replicate. From a financial perspective, this psychological tether is the ultimate customer retention tool. Research in educational psychology has consistently shown that haptic feedback, the tactile sensation of writing, improves memory retention and conceptual understanding. When a student or a CEO writes a note with a pencil, they are engaging in a multisensory experience. They smell the cedar, they feel the vibration of the lead, and they see the varying thickness of the line as they adjust their pressure. This friction is actually a feature, not a bug. It forces the brain to slow down, allowing for deeper processing. The pencil companies have capitalized on this by marketing their products as mindfulness tools. They are no longer just selling stationery, they are selling mental clarity. This shift has allowed them to maintain high prices even in a world of free digital alternatives, as consumers are willing to pay a premium for a tool that they believe makes them smarter and more creative. The economics of this psychological analog renaissance are particularly visible in the rise of slow productivity. As the workforce becomes increasingly overwhelmed by digital notifications and screen fatigue, the pencil has been repositioned as the ultimate offline device. It has no battery to die, no software to update, and most importantly, no notifications to distract the user. The fortune here is the economy of silence. Leading manufacturers like Staedtler and Faber-Castell have leaned into this, designing high-end sets that are presented like ritual objects. The packaging, the weight of the pencil in the hand, and even the sound of the sharpener are all engineered to create a sense of calm. This emotional branding creates a deep-seated loyalty that is immune to technological disruption. A digital stylus may be more efficient, but a pencil is more human, and in a world of artificial intelligence, humanity has become a luxury commodity. Furthermore, the psychology of the mark includes the unique relationship between the pencil and the concept of the mistake. Unlike ink, which is permanent and authoritative, or digital text, which can be deleted without a trace, the pencil mark exists in a state of permanent possibility. It can be erased, but it leaves a ghost, a faint memory of the previous thought on the paper. This makes the pencil the preferred tool for the first draft of history. Whether it is a storyboard for a blockbuster movie or the initial sketch of a new engine, the pencil allows for a specific type of creative risk-taking. The fortune of the industry is built on this safety net. By providing an eraser on the end of the tool, the manufacturer is psychologically giving the user permission to fail and try again. This iterative value is why the pencil remains the standard of the studio, generating massive revenue from the global creative industries that rely on this process of trial and error. The logistics of this psychological market also involve the scent of memory. The smell of incense cedar is one of the most widely recognized scents in the world, often triggering childhood memories of school and early creativity. This is a form of olfactory marketing that the pencil industry enjoys for free. When a consumer walks into a stationery store and smells the cedar, they are experiencing a dopamine hit of nostalgia. The pencil barons have protected this by fiercely guarding their timber sources. They know that if they switched to a cheaper, odorless wood or a plastic composite, they would lose the sensory signature that defines their brand. This is why California incense cedar remains the gold standard, despite being more expensive than other woods. It is an investment in the atmospheric brand, ensuring that the pencil remains a multisensory experience that a digital screen can never emulate. In the modern landscape, this psychological foundation led to the curation of the desk. Pencils have moved from junk drawers to display cases. High-end stationery influencers showcase pencil rotations to millions, creating a new digital-to-analog funnel. This lets companies launch subscription boxes and limited release bundles that capitalize on the human desire to collect. Industry wealth is no longer just utility, it is about identity. Your pencil choice reflects your values, an appreciation for history and a slower, more intentional life. By owning these tools of identity, pencil dynasties have secured their fortune for the next century. The foundation of fortune is ultimately built on the fact that while we live in a digital world, we still have analog bodies. We still need to touch, to smell, and to create in the physical realm. The pencil is the simplest possible interface between the human hand and the world of ideas. It is a 400-year-old technology that has been perfected rather than replaced. In our final segments, we will explore the future of the pencil in the age of sustainability and how the industry is preparing for a world where every material must be tracked from the forest to the final stub. We will see how the foundations of fortune are being reinforced by green technology and the enduring power of the analog archive. In the 21st century, the foundations of fortune for the pencil industry have undergone a structural shift toward the green economy. As global awareness of environmental impact has intensified, the world's leading pencil manufacturers have transformed their ancient timber-based business model into a cutting-edge example of circular sustainability. This was not merely a public relations move, it was a survival strategy. To protect their massive wealth in an era of strict environmental regulations and carbon taxes, the pencil barons had to prove that their product was not a drain on the Earth's resources, but a carbon sink. This led to the development of the carbon-neutral pencil, a product where every gram of carbon emitted during manufacturing is offset by the growth of the company's own vast, managed forests. This green shield has become a powerful financial asset, allowing companies to maintain their social license to operate while appealing to the ethically-minded modern consumer. The economics of the Green Foundation are rooted in the concept of biological capital. For a company like Faber-Castell, which manages over 10,000 hectares of pine forests in Brazil, the trees are more than just raw material, they are an appreciating financial asset that breathes. These forests absorb approximately 860,000 tons of carbon dioxide every year, which is significantly more than the company's global production operations emit. From a corporate valuation perspective, this makes the company carbon negative. In the modern financial world, where ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores dictate investment and interest rates, being a carbon-negative manufacturer provides a significant competitive advantage. It lowers the cost of borrowing and attracts a new class of institutional investors who are looking for green havens for their capital. The pencil, once a symbol of the Industrial Revolution's consumption, has been rebranded as the icon of the ecological future. This sustainability model also provides a moat against lower-cost competitors who rely on illegal logging or unmanaged timber sources. By achieving FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, certification for their entire product line, the European and American pencil giants have effectively locked out competitors who cannot prove the provenance of their wood. Many major retailers and government agencies now mandate that all stationery supplies must be FSC certified. This regulatory environment acts as a market filter, ensuring that the foundations of fortune remain in the hands of the established players who have the capital to manage their own forests. The wealth is no longer just in the graphite and the glue, it is in the certification and compliance that allows the product to sit on the shelves of the world's largest retailers. It is a sophisticated form of green protectionism that has secured the industry's profitability for the next generation. Beyond sustainability, the pencil has a unique foundation of fortune in the eternal archive. In our digital world, data is fragile, formats become obsolete and cloud services can be hacked. However, high-quality graphite on acid-free paper is practically eternal. This archive advantage is why museums and registries still rely on the pencil. Graphite is chemically inert, doesn't fade, and won't react with the environment. This permanent utility ensures demand from stable institutions. The fortune here is built on the power of the long view, the realization that as we go digital, we value the physical record even more. The logistics of the modern eco-pencil also involve the innovation of waste-to-wealth manufacturing. Leading factories have moved toward water-based lacquers and varnishes, eliminating the volatile organic compounds that once plagued the industry. They have also developed extruded wood pencils, made from the sawdust and shavings of their own mills. By grinding down the waste wood and mixing it with a biopolymer, they can create a synthetic wood pencil that sharpens with the same buttery smoothness as cedar but uses 100% of the log. This total yield strategy is a masterpiece of modern efficiency. It allows the manufacturer to get more pencils out of every tree, effectively lowering their cost of goods sold while marketing the resulting product as recycled and innovative. It is the ultimate expression of the foundation of fortune, finding profit in the very dust of the factory floor. Finally, the pencil's green foundation is bolstered by the zero-power nature of the tool itself. In an era of energy crisis and grid dependency, the pencil is one of the few high-performance tools that requires no external energy source. It is always on. This makes it an essential tool for resilience planning in both government and private sectors. From disaster relief kits to deep-sea exploration and space travel, the pencil remains the fail-safe technology. The industry has capitalized on this by positioning the pencil as the survivalist's writing tool. This niche market, while smaller than the school market, carries high margins and reinforces the brand's reputation for reliability. The pencil has survived the age of steam and the age of electricity. Now, it is positioning itself to survive the age of the carbon constraint, proving that the simplest foundations are the most difficult to break. As we approach our final segment, we will summarize the foundations of fortune that have built this multi-billion-dollar empire. We will look at the enduring legacy of the Borrowdale mine, the chemical genius of the Conte process, the marketing brilliance of the Imperial Yellow, and the psychological power of the analog mark. We will conclude with a look at the next 400 years of the pencil, exploring how this ancient tool will continue to shape human thought and record our progress in a world that is moving faster than ever before. The pencil is the ultimate time traveler, and its story is far from over. As we conclude this exploration into the foundations of fortune, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of a remarkable history and an even more profound future. The story of the pencil is the story of human civilization's need to leave a trace, to organize chaos, and to build empires from the dust of the earth. From that storm-ravaged valley in Borrowdale in 1564 to the high-tech, carbon-neutral forests of modern-day Brazil, the pencil has remained a constant. It has outlasted the rise and fall of monarchs, the birth of the industrial age, and the total digital transformation of the 21st century. But the foundation of fortune is not just a historical monument, it is a living, breathing economic engine that continues to evolve. To understand the future of this industry, we must look at how the pencil kings are preparing for the next 400 years of human progress. The ultimate summary of this fortune rests on four distinct pillars. The first is resource mastery. The industry was born from the control of a rare mineral, and it continues to thrive because the leading firms have secured the biological and chemical inputs required for their trade. By owning the forests and mastering the high-heat chemistry of polymer lead, they have insulated themselves from the volatility of the global market. They have turned a simple stick of wood into a high-tech delivery system for carbon. The second pillar is standardization and scale. The ability to produce billions of identical objects at a price point that is accessible to every human being on the planet is one of the greatest achievements of modern manufacturing. This power of the penny ensures that the pencil remains the most democratic tool ever created, a product that is equally useful to a child in a village school and a scientist in a space agency. The third pillar is psychological branding. The pencil industry was a pioneer in using color, name, and status to drive profit margins. From the imperial yellow of the Koh-i-Noor to the cult of the Blackwing, the industry has mastered the art of making the consumer feel something about a commodity. They have successfully positioned the pencil as the antidote to the digital age, a tool for mindfulness, creativity, and authentic human expression. This emotional connection is a foundation that no software update can ever replace. The fourth and final pillar is resilience. The pencil has survived every technological disruption of the last 4 centuries because it is fundamentally perfect. It is an object that cannot be further simplified without losing its utility. In a world of planned obsolescence, the pencil is a testament to the power of enduring design. Looking toward the future, the foundation of fortune is expanding into the realm of advanced carbon technology. Graphite is no longer just for writing, it is a critical material for the green energy transition. As the demand for lithium-ion batteries, which require massive amounts of high-purity graphite, continues to surge, the pencil companies find themselves at the center of a new industrial gold rush. While they use flake graphite for lead, their expertise in processing and purifying carbon is becoming a valuable intellectual asset. We are seeing the birth of graphene technology, a single-atom layer of carbon that is stronger than steel and more conductive than copper. Some pencil manufacturers are already exploring how to integrate these advanced materials into their professional-grade tools, potentially creating pencils that never break or that can conduct electricity for smart paper applications. Furthermore, the eternal archive remains a driving force for the industry's longevity. As the world becomes more concerned with digital fragility, the demand for physical, analog backups is growing. We are seeing the rise of data-proof registries and architectural firms that mandate a hand-drawn master set for every major project. The pencil is the only tool that can guarantee a record will remain legible for 1,000 years without needing a power source or a specific operating system. The fortune of the future will be built on this certainty. In a world of deepfakes and ephemeral data, the graphite mark on paper is the ultimate proof of reality. The pencil barons are positioning themselves as the guardians of human memory, a role that carries immense cultural and financial value. The legacy of the Titans, the Fabers, the Dixons, the Hartmuts, is a reminder that the greatest fortunes are often found in the things we take for granted. They built their empires on the realization that even in a world of complexity, humans will always crave simplicity. The pencil is a tool that requires no manual, no charging cable, and no subscription. It is a bridge between the mind and the world, a 3-cent miracle that has documented every great discovery and every personal heartbreak of the modern age. As long as there are thoughts that need to be captured and mistakes that need to be corrected, the pencil will remain on our desks and in our hands. This concludes our journey through the foundations of fortune, the global pencil empire. We have seen how a geological fluke in a British valley turned into a multi-billion-dollar global industry. We have explored the cutthroat marketing wars, the secret military spies, and the high-tech chemistry of the modern lead. But most of all, we have seen the power of a simple idea, executed with precision and protected by the pillars of monopoly, branding, and sustainability. The pencil is not just a tool, it is a monument to human ingenuity. It is a reminder that even the smallest mark can leave a legacy that lasts for centuries. Thank you for walking through this history with us, and may your own marks be just as enduring. Our next episode explores the multi-billion-dollar world of time. If you enjoyed this journey, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, and we'll see you next week.